Her body was shaking. The baby was coming, and he was leaving. "Elena, stop the drama," he said, cold, cruel, heartless. She reached for him, pleading, begging, but he didn't care. Just a crumpled $10 bill dropped on her stomach like she was nothing. "This is your worth," he sneered, and with that, he walked out. The door slammed, thunder roared, and in that instant, her world shattered. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back to our home. Before we dive into today's heart-wrenching story, I just wanted to take a moment to speak from my heart to yours. You know, I spend hours reading your comments, and it warms my soul to see how much you love these stories, how much you trust me with your time, and how deeply you feel for characters like Elena. But I noticed something today that made me a little sad. And it's not for me, it's for us. Most of my lovely family members here watch every single video. You cry with me, you celebrate with me, but you haven't hit that subscribe button yet. Please remember, this isn't just my channel. This is our space. This is a family we are building together. Every time you subscribe, our family grows stronger, and we can reach more people who need to hear these stories of hope and strength. So, if you truly feel like a part of this family, please don't just be a guest. Join us officially. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because we aren't just a channel, we are a family. Now, let's get back to Elena's journey. The apartment smelled like rain and cold wood, the kind of damp that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. Elena's back pressed against the floor, the grain digging into her skin, cold and unyielding, and yet somehow safer than standing. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each one clawing through her lungs like shards of glass. The baby kicked, sharp and desperate, and a wave of nausea rolled through her so sudden she had to squeeze her eyes shut. Thunder rattled the windows, a low growl that vibrated through the walls. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm in her chest, the panic, the pain, the betrayal, all rolling together until it was indistinguishable. She tried to move, to crawl toward the sofa, toward anything that might ease the pressure, but her muscles refused to cooperate. The floor was slick with the sweat of terror and pain, and the damp chill made her shiver violently. "Elena," came the voice, cold, clipped, disconnected. Thatcher Sterling, her husband, her supposed protector. The sound cut through her panic like a knife, slicing into her raw nerves. "Stop the drama." Elena's fingers scraped across the polished hardwood, reaching for him as though touching him could make the pain lighter, could make him human for just a moment. "Please, I can't do this alone," she whispered, voice cracking, trembling with fear she didn't even have the strength to hide. The storm outside seemed to echo her plea, a chorus of fury and dread. Thatcher's reflection in the mirror caught her eye. He was pristine, untouchable, a man made of polished steel and arrogance. Not a hair out of place, his coat sharp, his expression flat and dismissive. He zipped his suitcase with deliberate precision, each click of the metal teeth punctuating the sentence that hung unspoken between them. He didn't care. He reached into his wallet, the leather soft and worn in his hand, and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. Elena's chest tightened, disbelief snapping through her. He let it fall onto her stomach, letting it land like it had weight and meaning, but not the kind she deserved. It struck her skin with a thud, cold and mocking. "This is your value," he said, voice smooth as glass but laced with venom. "I'm going to Europe to live properly. Don't call me." The words hit her harder than the contractions. Properly. Live properly. As if her life, her body, her pain, her unborn child were beneath him, disposable. She gasped, fingers clutching at the bill, at herself, at anything she could grasp. her nails pressed into the wood of the floor, broken and jagged, biting into her palms without sensation because the shock had numbed everything. The door slammed. The sound was deafening, echoing off the bare walls, bouncing like a cruel punctuation mark on the night. Elena wanted to scream, to curse, to throw herself after him, but the sound of her own heartbeat drummed too loud in her ears. It rattled her ribs, shook her shoulders, filled her head until she couldn't think. The silence that followed was worse than the storm outside, more hollow, more accusing. Pain exploded in her abdomen, a jagged, sharp tide that stole her voice and left her gasping on the floor. Sweat ran down her temples, slick against her hairline, dripping into her eyes and stinging. She pressed her hands into her belly, trying to steady the baby, trying to soothe herself, and felt a strange, terrible betrayal. The child she carried, the life inside her, wasn't safe. Not with him. Her mind spun in circles. He left me. He really left me. He actually left me. The words repeated, each repetition a hammer against her skull. The storm outside mirrored her panic, a cacophony of wind and rain and metal shaking in the alleyway below. The apartment itself seemed to close in, the walls tilting, the shadows stretching long and sinister across the floorboards. Elena tried to lift herself, to get to the sofa, to reach the phone, but her body rebelled. A contraction split through her again, folding her over itself. She pressed her cheek to the wood, biting down on the skin of her arm to stop herself from crying out. Her breathing came in short bursts, each inhale tasting metallic like blood and fear and wet wood all mixed together. Thatcher's reflection haunted her. She could see him in the mirror again, adjusting his tie with the casual cruelty of a man used to owning everything he wanted. Her stomach clenched again, and a wave of nausea almost took her to her knees. Does he even know? Does he even care? The thought was pointless. He didn't care. She knew that. She always had in the quiet, terrifying ways his eyes had told her. A sudden shriek of wind outside slammed against the window. The lights flickered. For a moment, the apartment felt alive, oppressive, breathing with her panic. Her hands trembled violently, slick with sweat, pressing against the floor like anchors. Her feet scraped, searching for traction, but the wood was unyielding, cold against her skin. Every nerve burned. She tried calling out again. "Please, someone—" Her voice broke, cracking in a high, raw note that faded almost immediately. Her lips trembled. Her mouth tasted of copper and fear. She thought of hope, of the baby, of what was coming. "I can't do this. I can't." A flash of memory struck her. Her mother's face, the sound of her father's laughter, Leo's grin from years ago. A wave of longing crashed into her despair. But then reality slammed back. She was alone, truly alone. Thatcher was gone, and every inch of her body told her she might not make it. Her hands shook as she tried to press herself upright. Her fingertips scraped the floorboards, splinters biting through her skin, and she gasped, tasting blood and salt on her tongue. She curled around herself, the baby writhing inside, and for a moment a sob ripped from her chest, wild and unrestrained. The apartment was silent except for her ragged breathing and the storm's angry rhythm. Rain lashed against the window in harsh, staccato bursts. The old radiator hissed, releasing a hiss of steam that mingled with the sharp, metallic scent of cold. Elena's eyelids fluttered. heavy with exhaustion. The weight of betrayal pressed on her chest, pinning her to the floor. Time blurred. Contractions came faster, harder. Each one stole her voice, stole her focus, until she existed only in pain, only in the desperate need to survive. Her mind fought with itself. Fight, breathe, hold on. Each thought fraying like thread in a storm. She reached for the $10 bill lying on her stomach. Her fingers trembled violently as she curled it, feeling the crumpled paper like a cruel talisman. Every crease, every mark on it was a reminder of everything he had taken: dignity, safety, love. Rage mingled with fear, a bitter, sharp tang that tasted like iron in her mouth. Thunder rattled again, this time closer. A window shook. She pressed herself into the floor, arms wrapped around her stomach, rocking slightly. The baby kicked again, a frantic, tiny pulse of life that forced her to draw a ragged breath. Her tears mixed with sweat, dripping into the grain of the floor. Her lips whispered a name she hadn't dared to speak for years: Leo. The thought alone brought a moment of warmth. A flicker of hope she didn't know she could feel in the shadow of this night. But even that spark was small, fragile, and threatened by the cold, the storm, and the echo of the slammed door. She tried to stand. Legs buckled, arms shook. The apartment spun around her, tiles and shadows blurring, her nails dug into the floor. She pressed her face to the hardwood, biting her lip until the taste of iron filled her mouth. I will survive. I have to. Then, a sudden contraction hit like a tidal wave, stealing her breath entirely. Her vision narrowed, white spots dancing across the edges. She gasped, curling tighter around herself, tears streaming down her face. She felt the baby push, insist, demand. Her hands shook violently as she clutched the floor, the wood biting into her palms. A distant scream from the street outside, another storm victim, echoed through the walls. And for the first time in hours, Elena felt utterly, completely alone. Her vision blurred, consciousness slipping, the edges of reality softening like smoke. She whispered, "Please." Her voice was barely audible, drowned by the storm. The emptiness, the betrayal. And then darkness took her. The apartment was silent. Rain pelted the windows. On the cold floor, Elena's body lay limp, trembling, and the crumpled $10 bill rested against her swollen belly. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, a life and a choice hung by a thread. The rain cut through Leo's jacket like icy knives. He didn't notice. His boots slipped on the wet sidewalk as he carried her. The weight of Elena pressed against him, small but heavy with life. Her face was pale, eyes closed and lips trembling. The storm seemed to lean in, pressing down on him, as if it knew the weight of what he carried. Her hair, damp and tangled, smelled faintly of soap and fear. The crumpled $10 bill pressed against her stomach felt heavier than any weight he'd ever lifted. He could feel her pulse through the thin fabric of her dress, a fluttering, desperate rhythm that shook his entire being. A flash of lightning lit the sky, revealing her clenched fists, her jaw tight, her body tense, even in unconsciousness. He swore under his breath, gripping her tighter, careful not to jostle the baby. "Hang on, Elena," he whispered, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Hang on, I've got you." Every step toward the hospital felt endless. The wind slammed against him, pulling at his jacket, freezing his teeth, biting at his ears. Water dripped into his eyes, stinging, and he blinked it away. Each second stretched, each one a drumbeat against his chest, reminding him how close they were to the edge. By the time he reached, The hospital entrance, his jacket was soaked through, sticking to his chest, his hands raw from gripping her. The automatic doors whooshed open, and the warmth inside hit him like a wave. The antiseptic smell was sharp, clinical, but it smelled like hope compared to the storm outside. He carried her past the reception desk, past the sterile smells and buzzing fluorescent lights. Nurses glanced at him, but he didn't stop. His pulse was pounding in his ears, drowning out everything else. One nurse finally stepped forward. "Sir, is she—" "Husband?" she asked, voice cautious, professional. Leo shook his head, swallowing hard. "No. Family." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. A lie. Not a husband, not really family, but the only one who could save her. Paperwork followed. Forms signed with trembling hands, signatures shaky, money pressed against the counter, his life savings, all of it. He'd have to work twice as hard to recover it. But it didn't matter. Not tonight, not with her life and the babies hanging in the balance. Hours passed in a blur of white walls, antiseptic, and the sound of monitors beeping. Leo didn't leave her side. He held her hand, rubbed her back, whispered words he couldn't even remember later. Every contraction made him flinch. Every shiver from her body sent a ripple through him. The baby came screaming into the world, a tiny, furious thing demanding air. Leo was the first to cradle her, the first to hold hope wrapped in pink and warmth. His rough hands shook as he pressed her to his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered again, and for the first time he let himself hope that maybe they would survive this night. Elena moaned softly, eyelids fluttering open, confusion in her gaze. She looked at him, recognition dawning slowly. "Leo!" Her voice cracked, weak, fragile but alive. He smiled, forcing his voice steady. "Yeah, it's me. You're alive." The baby stirred, tiny fists waving in the air. He adjusted her in his arms, feeling the fragile life against his chest. "And so is she. She's alive too." Elena tried to sit up, pain lancing through her abdomen. Leo gently pressed her back down, eyes fierce, protective. "Don't move, just rest. You did good, Elena. You did really good." The hours bled into each other. The storm outside softened, rain turning to a gentle drizzle. The hospital smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, quiet conversations echoing down the halls. Leo stayed, watching over her, over the baby, as if letting go would let the world collapse. Somewhere far away, Thatcher Sterling was on a plane, probably laughing at the life he had abandoned. Leo didn't think about him, didn't waste a breath. The man who had hurt her would not get the satisfaction. Not tonight. Not ever. When morning came, the storm had passed completely, leaving a wet, glistening city behind the hospital windows. Elena's hair was plastered to her face, sweat and rain mingling. She blinked at the sunlight, confused, fragile. Leo adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, careful, tender, aware of every shiver. Where is he?" she whispered, and he knew what she meant without her saying the name. "He's gone," Leo said firmly, not gentle, not cruel, just truth. "And he won't be coming back tonight. You've got me, and you've got her." He nodded toward the baby, who yawned and stretched tiny fingers. Elena closed her eyes, relief and fear washing over her in equal measure. She had survived. The baby had survived, but the realization of just how alone she had been hit her like a punch to the gut. Leo sat beside her, exhausted but unwavering. The hospital smelled faintly of warmth now. Coffee from the break room, faint perfume from passing nurses, and the sticky antiseptic that clung to every corner. It felt unreal, delicate, as if life had spun on a knife edge and somehow landed them here. He didn't speak of debts, or the money he had spent, or the hours he would sacrifice. None of that mattered. Only that she and the baby were breathing. At some point, Elena drifted into a shallow sleep, eyelids heavy. Leo stayed awake, hands on his knees, mind racing. He knew the storm wasn't over. Not really. There were bills to pay, hospital visits, nights alone, the shadow of Thatcher Sterling looming somewhere beyond the airport. He made a silent promise. No matter what, he would be here. He would protect her. He would make sure she never felt this kind of terror again. By evening, the baby had been cleaned, wrapped, and fed. She slept in Leo's arms, small and fragile, but alive. He gazed down at her, marveling at the miracle, at how a single life could make everything else matter. Outside, Seattle's streets glistened under lamplight, wet and shimmering. Somewhere, thunder muttered far away, a reminder that storms always returned. But in this hospital room, life had won the first battle. Leo looked at Elena, who now opened her eyes, slow, cautious, and for a fleeting second, vulnerability and trust mingled in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but the weight of it made him catch his breath. He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. There's still a long night ahead, and a lot of mornings like this waiting for us." Elena tried to smile, but the pain made her grimace. The baby stirred again, tiny fingers curling around Leo's thumb. He pressed his forehead lightly against hers, a silent shield against everything the world might throw at them. Hours later, the night deepened, and the hospital corridors emptied. The lights above buzzed faintly. Leo sat in the chair, eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in his arms, every muscle taut, every nerve alert. He could feel the storm of the last night still in his bones, in his chest, in the frantic beating of his heart. He whispered promises to the baby, murmured them to Elena in between shallow breaths, telling them without words that they were safe, that he would not let them go. And then, as if fate itself had chosen this moment to tease him, a knock sounded at the door, sharp, insistent. Leo froze, heart hammering. He hadn't expected anyone, not now, not tonight. The baby stirred again, tiny hands flailing, and Elena's eyes widened, confusion and fear blending together. The shadow outside the door stretched long across the linoleum, an echo of something unknown, something that might change everything. Leo's eyes met the door. A shiver ran down his spine. Whoever was outside wasn't supposed to be here, and the storm, though past, felt like it had just begun. Perfect. I have chapter 3. I will now expand it into approximately 300 lines, following your strict instructions. The apartment smelled of home, in the way that small lived-in places do, the faint scent of laundry detergent mingling with the lingering tang of oil from Leo's long shifts. Elena sat at the tiny kitchen table, books open in front of her, pencil tapping softly against the paper as Hope slept curled beside her. The child's breathing was quiet, a gentle rhythm that should have been comforting, but tonight it felt fragile, almost tentative, like a secret being held too close. "Mama." Hope's voice was soft, hesitant, tugging at the edges of Elena's concentration. She looked up, saw her daughter's dark eyes, wide with curiosity, and her heart ached with the memory of everything that had happened before this quiet moment. "Where is my father?" The question hit Elena like a sharp gust of wind. She closed her eyes, inhaled the scent of the room, warm bread, the faint trace of Leo's aftershave from his jacket, and tried to steady herself. "Some people aren't strong enough to stay," she said gently, keeping her tone calm, measured. She didn't want to put fear in Hope's eyes, but honesty was necessary. Hope frowned slightly, her small hands clutching the corner of the blanket. Elena reached over, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. She felt the weight of years in that single touch. The years of nights spent alone, of worries and prayers whispered into the dark, the sacrifices she had made just to keep hope safe. The girl looked at her, waiting for more, and Elena forced a smile, careful to hide the tremor in her own voice. "But we're safe now. That's what matters." Life had settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and exhausting. The apartment above Leo's garage was small, cramped even, but it was theirs. It smelled of motor oil and rain-soaked concrete in the morning, of books and laundry at night, and somehow it felt like sanctuary. Leo worked long hours, grease streaked on his hands and face, coming home smelling of engine oil and sweat, tired to the bone, but still smiling when hope ran to greet him. Elena had taken to studying at night, often with Hope asleep beside her, the child's small hand occasionally brushing her arm as she reached for her own pencil. The nights were quiet, except for the hum of the heater, the distant sounds of the city beyond the window, the occasional thump of Leo's boots as he returned from a late shift. It was peaceful, almost deceptively so, like the calm after a storm. But the past never fully let her rest. One evening, after a long day of classes and work, Elena found herself laughing. Leo had wiped grease across his forehead while fixing the old car in the garage, streaks of black against his skin, and his grin was crooked but genuine. "You're the best brother anyone could have," she said softly, almost tenderly, and it sounded like more than words. It sounded like a confession she couldn't voice aloud. Leo nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't trust his own voice. Not around her, not when the weight of his feelings made it impossible to speak without cracking. His hands were still slick with oil, and he ran them along his thighs, trying to shake the sensation, trying to ground himself. He loved her silently, fiercely, and the ache in his chest was constant, a reminder of what he could never have, not while keeping her safe. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep and Elena had finally laid her pencil down, Leo sat alone in the garage. The scent of oil and gasoline clung to him, mixing with the faint perfume of the roses Elena kept by the window. He stared at his hands, hands that had fixed cars, held books, carried a woman and a child through storms literal and figurative. He wondered how love could hurt so quietly, how it could consume him from the inside without making a sound. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the garage doors, shaking loose the echoes of memories that refused to stay buried. The city lights flickered through the dusty windows, casting shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts of the past. Leo's mind wandered to the night he had found Elena on the floor, the storm pounding against the apartment, the $10 bill, the cold echo of betrayal. The image still burned in him, vivid and sharp, and he clenched his fists. He thought of the baby, of Hope now, 5 years old and resilient in ways that defied her size. The child had survived the storm, survived abandonment, survived a man who had chosen wealth over family. And in that survival, Leo saw a glimmer of hope. Not just for her, but for Elena too, for the life they could build together, cautious and quiet as it was. But tonight, a subtle unease lingered in the air. Leo couldn't shake it. Something in the shadows of the garage felt wrong, like the past was reaching forward, brushing against the present. He looked at the tools scattered around, the faint oil stains on the floor, the metal gleaming faintly under the single overhead light. He swallowed hard, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Elena was upstairs, unaware of the stirrings in the garage, of the tension that had wrapped itself around Leo like a second skin. She hummed softly while reading, the sound carrying faintly down the wooden stairs, and Leo closed his eyes, letting the warmth of that sound soothe him for a brief moment. But the wind outside whispered through the cracks, and the old garage doors groaned in reply. He rose, pacing slowly, boots scraping against the concrete, hands brushing over the car hood absent-mindedly. The ache in his chest refused to abate. He thought about what it would take to keep them safe. Not just tonight, but every night until hope grew strong enough to withstand the world. His life was bound to theirs now, and the responsibility weighed on him heavier than any engine he had ever lifted. A sudden sound, metal tapping lightly against metal, made him freeze. His heart skipped, a sharp jolt. The garage was supposed to be empty. He moved slowly, every sense alert, listening to the rhythm of his own pulse, the faint hum of the city beyond. He stepped closer to the source, careful not to make noise, and paused, holding his breath. Nothing. Just the wind. Possibly, or perhaps some rat, thinking it had found a new shelter. Leo's jaw tightened. He shook his head, telling himself it was nothing, but the knot in his stomach refused to loosen. Something had changed tonight, something beyond the ordinary rhythm of life, beyond the quiet survival they had carved out for themselves. He returned to the workbench, hands brushing over the oil-streaked tools, feeling the grit of the past, the residue of nights spent worrying, fighting, surviving. He thought of Elena upstairs, glowing softly in the lamplight, unaware of the tension pressing down around them. He thought of Hope, sleeping, small fists curling and uncurling, innocent and fierce all at once. Leo's eyes flicked to the window, where the streetlights glimmered against puddles. Reflections danced like fragmented memories, shadows that seemed to hint at something lurking just beyond their carefully contained world, and for the first time in years, a seed of fear, sharp, insistent, gnawing, planted itself firmly in his chest. He crouched, running a hand over his face, over the grease, over the sweat. He wondered how long they could maintain this fragile equilibrium, how long the quiet survival could hold. And then he realized, with a hollow pull in his stomach, that some storms, the ones that mattered most, didn't announce themselves. They arrived silently. Leo pressed his palms against the cold metal of the workbench, leaning heavily, breathing, ragged. He had kept them alive, yes. Protected them, yes. But tonight, a shadow had slipped past, and he didn't know if he could stop what was coming. Above, Elena turned a page, humming softly, unaware of the heartbeat of tension growing below. The night stretched on, fragile and taut, waiting, breathing. A sudden knock echoed through the garage door, sharp and deliberate. Leo froze. The baby stirred upstairs. Elena paused mid-page. Whoever or whatever stood outside wasn't supposed to be there. And in that pause, Leo realized the quiet survival they had built might be about to shatter. The knock at the garage door had been insistent, almost deliberate, echoing off the concrete walls like a heartbeat out of sync with the world. Leo's hand tightened around the wrench he'd been idly holding, the metal biting into his palm, grounding him. He stepped slowly toward the door, every nerve alert. Outside, the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows across the wet pavement, and the figure on the other side was small but purposeful. "Hello?" Leo's voice was rough, cautious, carrying through the garage. The figure shifted, and the dim light caught a flash of a white coat. A woman, young, sharp-eyed, and not intimidated by the shadows or the storm that had left the streets slick and shimmering. "I'm Dr. Maya Collins," she said, voice steady, carrying authority without arrogance. "I'm here for Elena." Leo's brows knitted together. "You know her?" His voice was wary. His hand hovered near the door latch, the baby sleeping quietly upstairs, Elena unaware of this intrusion. "I think I can help her," Maya said. Her eyes scanned the garage quickly, taking in the tools, the oil stains, the signs of a life lived in survival rather than comfort. Her gaze softened, but only just. "She's capable. I've seen her, and I don't ignore potential." Leo hesitated, instinct screaming, but something about her presence was different, calculated, honest. There was no greed, no ulterior motive lurking in her stance. He stepped aside. "She's upstairs. Don't touch anything down here." Maya nodded. She moved with purpose, boots clicking against the concrete floor, the faint smell of coffee and antiseptic clinging to her coat. Leo followed cautiously, never far behind, protective. Upstairs, Elena sat at her makeshift study desk, hunched over books and papers. The warm light of the lamp glinted off the framed $10 bill on her desk. It was more than paper to her. It was the fire that had carried her this far. She looked up, startled at the sound of the door opening. Maya's gaze met hers, sharp, analytical, but not unkind. "You don't ask questions like a patient," she said almost matter-of-factly. "You think like a doctor." Elena blinked, caught off guard. I don't have money," she said quietly, wary. She had learned early that help often came with a price. Maya smiled faintly, shaking her head. "I didn't ask about money." The words hung in the room, light and deliberate, like a promise rather than a statement. Something inside Elena shifted. The tension she had carried, the constant weight of fear and responsibility, felt lighter for a moment. It was as if someone had opened a door she didn't even know had been closed. That conversation became the spark. Maya guided her through applications for scholarships, introduced her to mentors who saw her potential, offered opportunities that Elena had never dared to imagine. Each step was deliberate, structured and firm, but beneath the structure was genuine belief, something Elena hadn't felt from anyone who truly mattered before. Elena studied like her life depended on it, and in a sense, it had. Every late night, every textbook she pored over with hope asleep beside her, every moment she pushed past exhaustion was fueled by the memory of the $10 bill and the man who'd abandoned her. Pain had been the teacher, but determination became the lesson. Leo watched quietly from the doorway, leaning against the frame, seeing the change in Elena. There was a light in her eyes now, sharper, more focused. He felt the familiar tug in his chest, part pride, part fear, part longing, but he kept it buried. She had to shine on her own terms first. Maya's guidance was relentless, but fair. She challenged Elena, pushed her to confront her weaknesses, encouraged her to embrace her strengths. At first, Elena resisted, hesitant to accept that someone believed in her without reservation. But slowly, day by day, she realized that this was not charity, not pity. This was someone seeing her for who she could be. The framed $10 bill stayed on her desk. It no longer burned with memory. It burned with purpose. Each time Elena glanced at it, she remembered the choice she had been given, or rather, the choice that had been taken from her. But now, the bill had a new meaning. Not pain, not humiliation, a promise. A reminder that she could rise beyond what had been thrown at her. Leo still worked long hours at the garage, his presence a silent backbone to Elena's ascent. But Maya became more than a mentor. She became a catalyst, someone who believed not because of obligation, but because she understood the hunger of someone who had fought for survival and refused to break. Elena's nights were long, filled with notes, textbooks, and whispered conversations with Hope, who now asked more questions, her curiosity insatiable. "Mama, why did he leave us?" Elena's hand brushed her daughter's hair back. "Some people can't face what they're supposed to," she said gently. She didn't want to speak Thatcher's name. Not in these quiet moments. Not here. Maya noticed the dynamic quietly, observing not just Elena, but Leo's unspoken love, his silent sacrifices. She saw the tension in the room, the delicate balance between protection, love, and unacknowledged longing, and she understood instinctively that this family was built on resilience, on unspoken commitments, and on a fire that refused to die. There were late-night visits to the library, mentors speaking with Elena, and subtle nudges toward opportunities she had never considered attainable. Each step forward built confidence. Each small victory made the weight of the past slightly more manageable. And yet, shadows lingered. The memory of abandonment, of the $10 bill, of the man who had chosen wealth over life, haunted her every decision, a subtle whisper that kept her sharp, vigilant, and unwilling to settle for less than her worth. One afternoon, Maya handed Elena a letter, embossed with the seal of a prestigious scholarship. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Don't waste it." Elena's fingers shook as she held the paper. She looked at Leo, who simply nodded, a quiet reassurance in his gaze. Hope clapped her small hands, unaware of the weight of significance in the document. The air seemed thick with possibility, the scent of fresh paper and ink, almost intoxicating. But then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson, Maya's expression changed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She glanced at Elena, then past her, toward the window, where the last light of day cast long shadows across the street. "Elena," she said softly, almost a whisper, "there's someone watching." The air in the small apartment seemed to shift. Leo's muscles tensed, the hairs on his arms standing on end. Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine. The night outside was still, the city lights flickering faintly, but the presence was palpable. Not just a stranger, not just coincidence, something deliberate. Elena's hand instinctively went to the $10 bill on her desk, not as a symbol of humiliation, not as a memory, but as a shield, a reminder that she had survived everything thrown at her. Maya's eyes met hers, unwavering. "You need to be careful. Not everyone who opens a door comes to help you." Leo's grip tightened on the railing of the stairs. He was ready, always ready, but even he couldn't predict what or who was approaching. A shadow moved across the street outside the window, pausing deliberately, as if calculating every step. Elena, unaware, adjusted her books, Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. And Leo realized with a cold certainty the quiet survival they had built might have just been noticed by someone who wouldn't let them stay safe. The shadow outside the apartment had vanished by morning, but the unease lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Elena tightened her grip on Hope's small hand, sensing the lingering pulse of danger. The city smelled of wet asphalt and morning coffee, the hum of traffic carrying through the cracks in the window, but the air inside their apartment felt heavy, taut with unspoken tension. Leo didn't speak, but his presence was a solid weight behind her. Every muscle in his body was coiled, alert, ready for anything that might break through their fragile peace. His dark eyes scanned the street below, calculating, anticipating, a man who had learned to read danger in shadows, in the smallest shift of movement. Elena rose from her chair, walking toward the window, letting the sunlight touch her face. The warmth was foreign, almost luxurious after years of survival, and yet her gaze didn't soften. It sharpened, reflecting a quiet steel, a woman who had endured storms both literal and metaphorical and had emerged intact, unbroken. Hope tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, will he come back?" Elena knelt, pressing her forehead gently against Hope's, inhaling the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. "Some people aren't strong enough to stay," she said quietly, her words deliberate, carrying both reassurance and truth. She kissed hope's temple, her fingers lingering for a moment, savoring the warmth that came from survival and love, not fear. Years had passed, each one carving strength into Elena like a sculptor chiseling stone. The small apartment above Leo's garage had become a haven of quiet resilience, the smell of oil and books blending seamlessly, a testament to the life they had built. But survival was not enough anymore. The world needed more. It began with a small idea, whispered between Elena and Maya over coffee late one night, a place where abandoned women, pregnant and alone, could find shelter, medical care, guidance, legal support, a foundation built not just on charity, but on justice and dignity. Elena worked tirelessly, nights stretching into early mornings, poring over budgets, legal forms, and medical protocols. Every dollar spent was accounted for, every decision weighed against. Both morality and practicality, Maya became her guiding star, offering insight and wisdom, while Leo became more than a protector. He became a strategist, a force quietly ensuring that nothing could undermine their progress. The Sterling Hope Foundation opened its glass doors to the public on a crisp autumn morning. Reporters swarmed, their questions sharp and invasive, cameras flashing against the sleek modern architecture. The world wanted to know why she had retained her married name, why she carried the legacy of a man who had abandoned her. Elena faced them calmly, her voice measured, eyes steady. "I took what was meant to break me and turned it into shelter for others," she said. The words cut through the hum of cameras and murmurs of journalists, a quiet declaration of power and resilience. Leo stood beside her, taller, broader, sharper, head of security. His presence was silent but commanding, a reminder to anyone who might dare underestimate them that this family, though forged in pain, was formidable. He did not speak, but the weight in his gaze carried centuries of unspoken commitment, a shield made of muscle, loyalty, and love that dared not be named. Inside the foundation, the atmosphere was electric. Nurses hustled through the corridors, social workers guided new arrivals, and women who had once felt discarded now walked with a sense of dignity, supported, seen, alive. The smell of antiseptic was softened by fresh flowers in every lobby, a subtle reminder that care could be both clinical and comforting. Elena's office was pristine, minimalistic, but one object dominated the space. The framed $10 bill mounted carefully on her desk. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a fuel, a promise, a reminder of everything she had survived and everything she had built from the ashes. Even now, as she gazed out over the city lights, she could feel the heartbeat of her past echo faintly. She whispered to herself, letting the words linger in the cool night air. "I survived you." Her lips barely moved, but the power behind them was immense, a soft but unbreakable declaration to the man who had abandoned her years ago. Across the Atlantic, Thatcher Sterling sat in a crumbling estate in Europe, surrounded by creditors and failure. The man who had once walked away from his family with arrogance and certainty now faced the stark reality of loss. Every deal had collapsed, every venture burned to ash, and every connection he had leveraged was gone. The arrogance that had carried him through boardrooms now betrayed him, leaving him raw, exposed, desperate. Back in Seattle, Elena walked through the foundation's halls, each step deliberate, measured. Women greeted her, some with tears, some with quiet smiles, all with gratitude that pierced deeper than any accolade or recognition. She shook hands, offered words of encouragement, and paused at the room where new mothers were learning how to care for their infants. The sound of babies cooing, of laughter and soft conversations filled the air like music, a symphony composed of survival, hope, and resilience. Leo trailed close behind, eyes scanning the environment, hands never far from his belt, senses attuned to any disturbance. Despite the calm, he could feel tension lingering like static. He knew the past had a way of reaching forward, of refusing to remain buried, and he remained vigilant. Elena stopped in front of a glass wall, peering out at the city skyline. The lights shimmered on the water, streets glowing with reflections. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of autumn leaves and distant ocean, letting it fill her lungs with a sense of victory, tempered by caution. She had fought for this life, for hope, for every woman who had been abandoned or overlooked, but the night carried whispers, subtle shifts that made her pulse tighten. Somewhere in Europe, the man who had once dismissed her value was losing everything, yet she could feel the pull of unfinished business. Fate had a way of returning, and some lessons were never complete until the teacher faced the student fully. Leo stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Whatever comes," he said low and firm, "we're ready." His words were not boastful. They were a vow, a silent promise, as binding as any contract, forged in years of shared struggle, in protection and in love that dared not speak its name. Elena nodded, letting herself feel the weight of accomplishment, but never complacency. The $10 bill glimmered faintly in her peripheral vision, a reminder that strength could be born from humiliation, that power could grow from pain, and that vengeance, when channeled correctly, could be absolute. The night deepened. Outside, the city whispered secrets in the wind, and the foundation's lights glimmered like beacons. Inside, women slept soundly, mothers cradled children, and for one moment, the world felt right. Yet shadows never truly vanish, and the echoes of the past never sleep for long. Elena returned to her office, closing the door quietly behind her. She pressed her palms against the glass, watching the lights shimmer across the water, thinking of the man who had abandoned her. The man who had underestimated the power of what he tried to destroy. She whispered again, almost to herself, "I survived you, and I will not be broken again." Leo leaned against the doorframe, eyes dark, alert, sensing that the fragile piece they had carved would soon be tested. The sense of being watched, of being measured by some unseen force, coiled in the pit of his stomach. As Elena turned to leave, a soft chime echoed from her office computer. An email subject line flashed across the screen. "We know your secrets, Elena Sterling." Her breath caught, and Leo's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. The calm they had built was about to shatter. "Perfect. I have Chapter 6. I will now expand it into approximately 250 lines, following your strict instructions." Thatcher Sterling had returned to a country he once dominated, but the streets smelled different now, damp, cold, and unwelcoming. The sharp scent of rain on asphalt filled the alleyways, mixing with the faint perfume of fallen leaves and exhaust fumes. The man who had once walked through life with entitlement and ease now felt each step heavy, every footfall a reminder that nothing was left for him. His European ventures had crumbled faster than he could count the money he had squandered. Friends had vanished, abandoned him to face angry creditors, each call a dagger to his pride. Bank accounts were empty, his credit lines frozen. Every familiar luxury had become a reminder of how little he actually owned. But then he saw her. Her face, bold, confident, radiant, on a magazine cover that gleamed in the newsstand lights like a challenge. The headline screamed, "Elena Sterling, the woman redefining healthcare in America." He stopped, staring through the glass, hand brushing over the crumpled paper. For a long moment, the world seemed to still around him. He traced the curve of her smile in the photograph, the fire in her eyes, the elegance that seemed to mock his failures. "She owes me," he muttered, voice low, gravelly from too many sleepless nights, and too much wine. The arrogance that had carried him through boardrooms was still there, clinging to him like a second skin, but beneath it trembled desperation he refused to acknowledge. He bought the last suit he could afford, the only piece that still carried a whisper of the man he had once been. He adjusted the cufflinks, smoothed the lapels, and practiced a smile in the reflection of a shop window. It was forced, rehearsed, a lie he told himself he could still inhabit. The building of the Sterling Hope Foundation loomed ahead, glass and steel reflecting the overcast sky. The wind whipped around his coat, tugging at him, almost as if the city itself were resisting him. But he stepped forward anyway, heels clicking against the wet pavement, each sound echoing like a countdown to reckoning. Inside, the lobby was pristine, sterile, in a way that whispered of efficiency and power. Nurses, interns, and staff moved through the halls with precision, every step a testament to the order Elena had imposed. Thatcher paused near the reception, pretending familiarity, though every polished surface, every confident movement of the people here reminded him that this world was no longer his. He approached the front desk, smiling with practiced charm. "I'm looking for Elena Sterling," he said, voice smooth, controlled. The words felt empty, even to him. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, her expression polite but distant. "Do you have an appointment?" He shook his head, forcing warmth into his tone. "No, just an old friend here to see her." The receptionist's eyes flicked briefly to a security monitor, where Leo appeared, silent, unyielding, scanning the entrance with hawk-like precision. Thatcher felt a chill crawl down his spine as he realized the man he had dismissed as a mechanic 5 years ago was no longer the same boy he had ignored. Leo's gaze locked on him, and the air seemed to thicken. It wasn't a stare of curiosity, it was the weight of protection, of a promise to guard Elena at any cost. Thatcher swallowed, attempting to mask his rising panic with arrogance, but the tension was palpable. He finally moved toward the elevator, forcing confidence into each step, but the building's layout was unfamiliar to him. Every corridor, every glass door reminded him that he had no control here. He reached the executive floor and paused outside Elena's office. Through the glass, he could see her silhouette, upright, commanding, the $10 bill still framed on her desk, glinting softly in the light. For a moment, he imagined she would panic, that she would remember him with fear, with longing, with need. But he didn't see a trace of the woman who had cried alone on the floor that night years ago. He saw a queen, a force, a woman who had taken what he tried to destroy and turned it into an empire. He knocked softly, a perfunctory gesture, almost hesitant. "Elena," he said again, louder this time. "It's me, Thatcher." Inside, Elena lifted her gaze, eyes meeting his. Her expression was unreadable at first, then slowly, deliberately, she smiled, not with warmth, but with recognition and power. The room smelled of polished wood and new paper, clean and untouched by chaos. And, in that scent, was her strength, a reminder that she belonged nowhere he could reach. Leo stepped beside her, silent, the movement subtle, but deadly. He didn't need to speak. His stance, his presence communicated everything. Thatcher's mind raced, trying to calculate an angle, a word, a charm that might undo the invisible wall between them. Elena spoke, calm, precise. "You're here." Her voice carried authority, but also a quiet, dangerous amusement. "I wondered when you'd realize that $10 wasn't a loan, but a lesson. And lessons, they have consequences." Thatcher opened his mouth, but no words came. He had prepared speeches, apologies, lies, and threats. Now, faced with her, every rehearsed plan dissolved. His best suit felt like a costume, his arrogance like a mask he couldn't wear. Leo shifted slightly, a subtle warning, and the atmosphere thickened. Even the soft hum of the office light seemed charged, aware. Thatcher realized, for the first time, that he was no longer the predator in this room. He was an intruder. Elena stepped closer to her desk, fingers brushing the edge, framing the $10 bill in her gaze, as if drawing energy from it. "You thought returning would undo what I built," she said softly. "That I'd crumble for you." Thatcher's chest tightened. He tried again. "I came for hope. For—" She cut him off with a glance. "For nothing. You came for nothing. She's 5 now. She doesn't know you. She doesn't need you. And I—" Her voice faltered briefly, not in weakness, but in controlled fire. "I've become everything you never imagined I could be." The man who had once controlled boardrooms, who had believed money and status were all-powerful, now felt the cold gnaw of impotence. Every ounce of confidence, every illusion of entitlement slipped through his fingers. Leo's hand moved slightly, fingers brushing the holster at his side, not a threat yet, but a reminder that this space was protected, that the family Thatcher abandoned had grown stronger than him in every conceivable way. A quiet laugh escaped Elena, low and deliberate. "Do you remember the $10? That was your first and last lesson. You thought it was cheap, small, insignificant. But look at what it bought me. Everything." Thatcher swallowed, heart pounding, pride cracking. His friends gone, his empire gone, his control gone, and in this room the woman he had discarded was untouchable, radiant and unyielding. He opened his mouth, searching for a word to salvage dignity, to regain even a shred of dominance, but there was none. Only the soft echo of his own failures mirrored in her unwavering gaze. A sudden alert pinged from the office security system. Leo's eyes narrowed as he scanned the monitors. Outside, a black SUV idled, engine running, windows tinted, unmoving but ominous. Thatcher turned slowly, confused. Elena's calm voice sliced through the tension. "You're not the only one who's been watching." Thatcher's hand hovered near the doorknob, the polished metal cool under his fingers, yet the sweat prickling at the back of his neck betrayed the illusion of control he tried so hard to maintain. The black SUV outside had not moved, its engine idling softly, a reminder that someone, or something, was watching every step he took. "Elena, darling," he said smoothly, voice carefully measured. "I'm home." The words felt rehearsed, even to him. He'd imagined this reunion 1,000 times, picturing her running into his arms, forgiveness written in her eyes. But the air in the office was different than in his fantasies. It smelled, faintly, of polished wood, ink, and subtle floral notes, an aroma that reminded him that this space belonged to her now, not him. Before he could step closer, a hand, strong, commanding, unyielding, clamped onto his shoulder, cold, steady, immovable. He felt the weight of it, the presence behind it, and instinctively stiffened. "You're not welcome here," said Leo, voice low, controlled but laced with lethal certainty. Thatcher laughed nervously, a sound that cracked halfway through. "And who are you?" His eyes darted to the man's face, searching for weakness, for a hint that the mechanic he had once ignored could be anything other than mortal. Leo leaned closer, so close that Thatcher could feel the heat radiating off him. "The man who stayed," he said, each word deliberate, measured like the strike of a hammer. Fear hit Thatcher like ice water for the first time in years. There was no mask to hide behind, no arrogance to cling to, no wealth to bend reality in his favor. The room, once imagined as a stage for his charm, had become a cage. Elena emerged from behind her desk, each step deliberate, confident, unwavering. The heels clicked against the floor, a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat of authority, a pulse Thatcher could neither ignore nor interrupt. She stopped a few feet away, hands folded lightly, gaze sharp and unwavering. "You came back," she said softly, almost gently, but her words carried the weight of every insult, every slight, every moment of abandonment he had caused. "And yet, you still think you belong here." He swallowed, throat tight. "Elena, She raised a hand, a subtle gesture that halted him mid-sentence. "I don't want your excuses. I don't want your lies. And I certainly don't want your presence near hope." Thatcher's jaw clenched. "I came for her. You came for nothing." Elena interrupted, her voice calm, precise, unshakable. "She doesn't need you. She doesn't know you. And I have built a life you tried to steal." Leo shifted slightly, hand still on Thatcher's shoulder, a quiet but unmistakable reminder of the boundary that had been drawn. "You leave now," Leo said evenly, "or you'll find out just how seriously I take trespassers." Thatcher's heart raced. He tried to project composure, the same composure he'd relied on for years, but the room closed in. Every inch of space seemed to push him back. Every glance from Elena reminded him that he was no longer in control, and every heartbeat echoed like a drum in his ears. "You think this is just about money?" Elena asked, voice rising slightly, not in anger, but in controlled intensity. "You think that leaving me with $10 meant you won? That abandoning your own daughter made you untouchable?" Thatcher opened his mouth, but no words came. Each syllable he had rehearsed for this moment evaporated, leaving only raw panic beneath the carefully constructed surface. Leo's grip tightened, subtle but unmistakable. The air between the three of them was taut, charged, a tension that could snap in an instant. Outside, the hum of the black SUV seemed louder, as though even the city recognized the standoff. Elena stepped closer, slow, deliberate, her eyes never leaving Thatcher's face. "Do you remember that night?" she asked, voice soft but deadly. "When you thought I had no value? When you threw $10 at me?" He flinched, unable to meet her gaze. I didn't know." "You didn't know," she said, cutting him off. "But I did, and I survived. Not just me, but hope, and every woman this foundation touches, every life we save, every victory we achieve. It's built on what you tried to destroy." The room seemed smaller now, oppressive, filled with invisible weight. Thatcher's pride, arrogance and entitlement, once his armor, had become a liability. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to flee. But the part of him that had survived so many boardroom battles refused to crumble entirely. Elena turned her gaze toward the city through the glass wall behind her. The lights shimmered on the water, reflecting her power and control. "You thought returning would change anything," she said. "That you could walk back into our lives and pick up where you left off. But the world doesn't work that way. And you're not the world. You're just a man who never learned." Thatcher tried to speak, tried to force the charm that had carried him through years of entitlement, but the words stuck, thick and uncooperative. Fear and shame twisted together inside him, choking the syllables from his throat. Leo leaned back slightly, still vigilant, still unmovable, a quiet sentinel between the past and the future. He didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. One wrong move, one step closer, and the consequences would be immediate. Absolute. Elena's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. It was not warm. It was deliberate, a reminder that she now wielded the power, and every action in this room was hers to command. Thatcher's vision flickered to Hope, who peeked from behind Leo's legs, curious but unafraid. Seeing her smile, her innocence untouched, struck him with a pang he had never anticipated. This child, his own daughter, was stronger, safer, happier, and completely beyond his reach. Panic began to edge out arrogance in Thatcher's chest. He realized finally that he was powerless, not just in the office, but in the life he had tried to dominate. The realization was suffocating. The man who had abandoned them, who had valued status above love, was now a man trapped in his own failures, staring at the consequences of every selfish choice. Elena stepped closer, hand brushing the edge of the desk, framing the $10 bill in her gaze. "This," she said softly, almost tenderly, "was your last gift, and I've turned it into everything you will never have." The office seemed impossibly silent, every breath, every heartbeat magnified. Thatcher's best suit felt heavy, constricting, suffocating him. The world he had once commanded with money and charm had collapsed, leaving only the raw truth. He was alone, powerless, and utterly irrelevant here. Leo's eyes never left him, scanning, calculating, prepared to act if necessary, and though his stance was calm, every muscle in his body was ready, lethal. Elena's gaze softened slightly toward Hope. The child's laughter was a small, defiant triumph against the man who had tried to destroy everything. A soft chime rang from the building's security panel. Leo's head snapped toward it, instincts immediate. On the screen, another figure appeared outside. Someone taller, broader, moving with precision, holding something in his hands that gleamed faintly under the city lights. Elena's eyes narrowed. "He's not alone," she whispered. And for the first time, even Thatcher sensed that the game was far from over. Thatcher's hand hovered near the doorknob, the polished metal cool under his fingers, yet the sweat prickling at the back of his neck betrayed the illusion of control he tried so hard to maintain. The black SUV outside had not moved, its engine idling softly, a reminder that someone, or something, was watching every step he took. "Elena, darling," he said smoothly, voice carefully measured. "I'm home." The words felt rehearsed even to him. He'd imagined this reunion 1,000 times, picturing her running into his arms, forgiveness written in her eyes, but the air in the office was different than in his fantasies. It smelled faintly of polished wood, ink, and subtle floral notes, an aroma that reminded him that this space belonged to her now, not him. Before he could step closer, a hand, strong, commanding, unyielding, clamped onto his shoulder, cold, steady, immovable. He felt the weight of it, the presence behind it, and instinctively stiffened. "You're not welcome here," said Leo, voice low, controlled but laced with lethal certainty. Thatcher laughed nervously, a sound that cracked halfway through. "And who are you?" His eyes darted to the man's face, searching for weakness, for a hint that the mechanic he had once ignored could be anything other than mortal. Leo leaned closer, so close that Thatcher could feel the heat radiating off him. "The man who stayed," he said, each word deliberate, measured, like the strike of a hammer. Fear hit Thatcher like ice water. For the first time in years, there was no mask to hide behind, no arrogance to cling to, no wealth to bend reality in his favor. The room, once imagined as a stage for his charm, had become a cage. Elena emerged from behind her desk, each step deliberate, confident, unwavering. The heels clicked against the floor, a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat of authority, a pulse Thatcher could neither ignore nor interrupt. She stopped a few feet away, hands folded lightly, gaze sharp and unwavering. "You came back," she said softly, almost gently, but her words carried the weight of every insult, every slight, every moment of abandonment he had caused. "And yet, you still think you belong here." He swallowed, throat tight. Elena, She raised a hand, a subtle gesture that halted him mid-sentence. I don't want your excuses. I don't want your lies, and I certainly don't want your presence near hope. Thatcher's jaw clenched. I came for her. You came for nothing, Elena interrupted, her voice calm, precise, unshakable. She doesn't need you. She doesn't know you, and I have built a life you tried to steal. Leo shifted slightly, hand still on Thatcher's shoulder, a quiet but unmistakable reminder of the boundary that had been drawn. You leave now, Leo said evenly, or you'll find out just how seriously I take trespassers. Thatcher's heart raced. He tried to project composure, the same composure he had relied on for years, but the room closed in. Every inch of space seemed to push him back. Every glance from Elena reminded him that he was no longer in control, and every heartbeat echoed like a drum in his ears. You think this is just about money? Elena asked, voice rising slightly, not in anger, but in controlled intensity. You think that leaving me with $10 meant you won? That abandoning your own daughter made you untouchable? Thatcher opened his mouth, but no words came. Each syllable he had rehearsed for this moment evaporated, leaving only raw panic beneath the carefully constructed surface. Leo's grip tightened, subtle but unmistakable. The air between the three of them was taut, charged, a tension that could snap in an instant. Outside, the hum of the black SUV seemed louder, as though even the city recognized the standoff. Elena stepped closer, slow, deliberate, her eyes never leaving Thatcher's face. Do you remember that night? She asked, voice soft but deadly. When you thought I had no value, when you threw $10 at me. He flinched, unable to meet her gaze. I didn't know. You didn't know, she said, cutting him off. But I did. And I survived. Not just me, but hope. And every woman this foundation touches, every life we save, every victory we achieve, it's built on what you tried to destroy. The room seemed smaller now, oppressive, filled with invisible weight. Thatcher's pride, arrogance, and entitlement, once his armor, had become a liability. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to flee. But the part of him that had survived so many boardroom battles refused to crumble entirely. Elena turned her gaze toward the city through the glass wall behind her. The lights shimmered on the water, reflecting her power and control. You thought returning would change anything, she said, that you could walk back into our lives and pick up where you left off. But the world doesn't work that way, and you're not the world. You're just a man who never learned. Thatcher tried to speak, tried to force the charm that had carried him through years of entitlement, but the words stuck, thick and uncooperative. Fear and shame twisted together inside him, choking the syllables from his throat. Leo leaned back slightly, still vigilant, still unmovable, a quiet sentinel between the past and the future. He didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. One wrong move, one step closer, and the consequences would be immediate, absolute. Elena's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. It was not warm. It was deliberate. A reminder that she now wielded the power, and every action in this room was hers to command. Thatcher's vision flickered to Hope, who peeked from behind Leo's legs, curious but unafraid. Seeing her smile, her innocence untouched, struck him with a pang he had never anticipated. This child, his own daughter, was stronger, safer, happier, and completely beyond his reach. Panic began to edge out arrogance in Thatcher's chest. He realized finally that he was powerless, not just in the office, but in the life he had tried to dominate. The realization was suffocating. The man who had abandoned them, who had valued status above love, was now a man trapped in his own failures, staring at the consequences of every selfish choice. Elena stepped closer, hand brushing the edge of the desk, framing the $10 bill in her gaze. "This," she said softly, almost tenderly, "was your last gift, and I've turned it into everything you will never have." The office seemed impossibly silent, every breath, every heartbeat magnified. Thatcher's best suit felt heavy, constricting, suffocating him. The world he had once commanded with money and charm had collapsed, leaving only the raw truth. He was alone, powerless, and utterly irrelevant here. Leo's eyes never left him, scanning, calculating, prepared to act if necessary. And though his stance was calm, every muscle in his body was ready, lethal. Elena's gaze softened slightly toward Hope. The child's laughter was a small, defiant triumph against the man who had tried to destroy everything. A soft chime rang from the building's security panel. Leo's head snapped toward it, instincts immediate. On the screen, another figure appeared outside, someone taller, broader, moving with precision, holding something in his hands that gleamed faintly under the city lights. Elena's eyes narrowed. "He's not alone," she whispered. And for the first time, even Thatcher sensed that the game was far from over. The figure outside hesitated for a heartbeat, the glow of the city lights reflecting off their polished shoes. Elena's hand lingered on the armrest of her chair, calm and deliberate. She didn't flinch. She had faced storms before, abandoned in the cold, broken and bleeding, and survived them all. The memory sharpened her resolve, a knife honed on years of pain and endurance. Her gaze shifted to Thatcher. He knelt there, the freshly printed $10 bill at his feet, mocking him in silent triumph. His chest heaved, pride shattered, arrogance stripped away by the weight of consequences he had refused to imagine. "You left me to die," Elena said, her voice calm, deadly calm. The words sliced through the tense air like a scalpel. Thatcher forced a smile, a weak imitation of charm. I made mistakes," he said. The word sounded hollow even to him. Elena's smile didn't reach her eyes. She stood slowly, letting the years of struggle elongate her posture, filling the room with presence and power. She was taller, stronger, unyielding. Every inch of her radiated authority and survival. "You gave me $10 and called it mercy," she said, the sentence rolling over him like a storm surge. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred, it was judgment, final and absolute. She moved toward the drawer in her desk, each step deliberate, echoing slightly on the hardwood floor. Her fingers brushed the smooth wood, lifting the drawer with care. Inside, a crisp, new $10 bill gleamed, a mirror of the humiliation he had inflicted years ago. She dropped it at his feet. The bill fluttered slightly, landing with a soft whisper on the floor, and Thatcher's eyes followed it like a tether to the past. "I bought your debts," Elena said. Her voice was steady, cold, precise. "I bought your family estate, your name. Everything you ever thought was yours now belongs to me." Thatcher's knees dug into the floor, the leather of his shoes slipping slightly on the polished wood. He tried to speak, tried to force arrogance back into his tone, but nothing emerged. Words failed him, like brittle paper torn by winds of reality. Outside, the figure in the black SUV remained motionless, watching, but inside, the room was alive with quiet devastation. The air smelled faintly of polished wood, ink, and something sharper. Power realized, justice delivered. Elena leaned slightly on her desk, one hand resting on the edge, fingers taut with control. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to threaten. Her presence alone suffocated the illusions Thatcher had carried into the room. "Do you understand now?" she asked softly. Everything you thought you owned, everything you thought mattered, it's gone. And not because I took it, because you never earned it. You abandoned what was yours to nurture, and I built it from the ground up. Thatcher swallowed, every instinct screaming to flee, to disappear. But his pride, fractured and splintered, held him in place. He looked around the office, the glass walls, the framed $10 bill, the skyline beyond, and realized he was completely irrelevant. The black SUV outside shifted slightly. The figure inside leaned forward, revealing a face partially obscured by shadows. A faint glimmer of steel reflected in the dashboard light, a subtle reminder that someone else was now watching, waiting, ready. Elena noticed the movement out of the corner of her eye. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. The calm she carried was a weapon honed through years of struggle and unyielding determination. Leo stepped closer to Thatcher, voice low, deadly. "You're done here," he said. "One more move, and you'll regret ever thinking you could return." His hand hovered near the edge of his belt, a silent threat that required no elaboration. Thatcher's mind raced. He had imagined confrontations like this countless times, rehearsed every word, every gesture. None of it mattered now. The man who had once controlled boardrooms, manipulated deals, and walked over others to get what he wanted was reduced to trembling, kneeling, powerless. Eleanor's eyes softened briefly toward Hope, who peeked from behind Leo, her small hand gripping his jacket. The child's innocence and trust highlighted the magnitude of everything Thatcher had lost. Every lie, every act of cruelty, every moment he had turned away, now meaningless. "I hope you understand," Elena continued, calm, precise, her words deliberate, like a scalpel cutting through pretense. "This is what happens when you abandon the ones who matter. This is what happens when you think wealth can replace love and power can replace respect." Thatcher's shoulders slumped. The best suit he wore felt like a costume, his arrogance a distant memory. He realized that the woman before him, the empire she had built, the life she had carved from ashes, all of it was untouchable. He was not a man returning to his family. He was a ghost, a relic of a past that no longer existed. Outside, the SUV engine hummed, faint but deliberate, signaling that the world outside the office was about to intrude. Elena didn't move toward the window. She didn't need to. She'd learned the power of observation, of preparation, of turning every threat into opportunity. She lifted her hand slightly, pointing to the $10 bill on the floor. This is the only thing you own now. A token. Nothing more. And even that." She let the words hang, heavy, dangerous, before letting them dissipate in the silence of the room. Thatcher's eyes darted around, looking for a lifeline, for an escape, for a shred of dominance. But there was none. Every measure of control he had ever claimed evaporated. Leo's gaze never wavered, eyes tracking every subtle movement of the man who had tried to destroy everything. His presence alone was a warning, a wall of loyalty, strength, and silent judgment. Elena straightened, taking a final step back, letting the room breathe with her authority. Her voice softened slightly, almost contemplatively. "Some people think they can break you with $10. Some people think the past can define the future. But I am stronger than your lessons, and Hope, she is stronger than your neglect." Thatcher's knees sank further into the polished wood, the weight of everything he had lost pressing down like an anchor. The billionaire he had once been, the man who had walked out without a second thought, no longer existed. The figure in the SUV outside moved closer, stepping into the dim light. Elena's eyes flicked to them. Recognition sparked briefly, a new calculation forming in her mind. The game wasn't over. The past had returned, yes, but now she controlled the board. Her gaze returned to Thatcher, steady, lethal in its calm. "And you," she whispered almost to herself, "you will leave here with nothing but the lesson you refuse to learn." A sudden crash echoed from the SUV. Tires screeched as the door opened, revealing another figure, taller, broader, moving with purpose. Elena's heart tightened, not from fear, but anticipation. Someone had come for more than revenge, and the night was far from over. Thatcher's struggles were feeble against the quiet strength of the security team. Their hands gripped him firmly, but without malice, the motion precise, efficient, removing him like a broken piece of furniture from a house he no longer belonged to. "Stop! She's my wife!" Thatcher's voice cracked, desperation bleeding into every syllable. His face was red, eyes wide with disbelief, the arrogance that had carried him for years crumbling under the weight of reality. Elena didn't flinch. Not even a hint of hesitation. She stood tall, voice steady, controlled. "She's my daughter," she said. The words were simple, yet they carried a lifetime of justice, survival, and truth. Hope's small hand tightened around Leo's. The little girl's brown eyes were wide, absorbing the chaos with a clarity Thatcher couldn't fathom. She had grown up in this space, in this fortress of resilience, surrounded by love and hard work, learning early what mattered and what didn't. "Mama," Hope asked softly, voice lilting but firm. "Is he the man who left?" Elena knelt beside her, face calm, eyes gentle. "Yes," she said, brushing a strand of hair from Hope's face. Her touch was both tender and protective, a shield forged from years of vigilance. Hope tilted her head, processing the scene. She watched Thatcher's flailing, heard the empty protests, and made a decision in her small yet formidable mind. "Then he's not family," she said, voice unwavering, a quiet authority in her tone that mirrored her mother's resolve. Thatcher's knees dug into the floor as he gasped. The truth hit him with a weight far heavier than any financial loss or failed business deal. For the first time in his life, he had no control. He had no leverage, no one to manipulate, nothing. Leo's hand never left Hope's shoulder, guiding her back from the edge of the confrontation, keeping her safe while silently communicating that the past was being handled. He met Thatcher's gaze briefly, a warning. The man who had abandoned Elena and Hope had no path forward. The office was silent except for the soft hum of city life outside, the distant wail of a siren and the faint squeak of the security team's shoes against polished floors. Every sound seemed amplified in the tense quiet. Thatcher tried to reach for Elena, to plead, to justify, but his hands were grabbed, twisted and pinned gently yet firmly. Every movement he attempted only highlighted his impotence. The man who had once commanded boardrooms, charm and fear was reduced to a shouting, kneeling shadow of himself. "You tried to buy my forgiveness," Elena said softly, her voice carrying across the office. "You tried to buy my life, my daughter, my peace. But there are things money can't purchase, things you will never understand." Hope tugged slightly at Leo's hand, feeling the tension, but her gaze stayed on Thatcher, assessing, understanding, and rejecting him all at once. Her young mind, shaped by love, struggle, and survival, made the declaration he could neither ignore nor reverse. Thatcher's throat constricted. His attempts at arrogance, at manipulation, evaporated in the presence of the truth he had ignored for so long. The billionaire facade, the charm, the power. It all dissolved in the face of what really mattered: love, loyalty, and integrity. Elena took a slow step forward, the movement deliberate. "You left us to survive on nothing," she said, calm, precise. "You abandoned your responsibilities, and now you see what that cost you." Thatcher tried to stammer, to force some form of dominance, but his words failed him. His eyes darted to hope again. The innocence and courage in her gaze reflected everything he'd lost, everything he had failed to protect or nurture. "Look at her," Elena said, gesturing to Hope, small hand gripping Leo's. "She doesn't need you. She never did. And the life you abandoned. We built it anyway." The black SUV outside shifted slightly again, engine humming, a subtle reminder that the world beyond the office still carried potential threats. But inside, it was irrelevant. Elena's presence, her power, and the loyalty of those around her rendered external fear powerless. Thatcher's knees scraped the polished floor as he realized every bridge he had burned had been rebuilt without him. Every relationship, every connection, every empire he had imagined he controlled now existed independently of his influence. Leo's hand, steady and unyielding, pressed lightly against Thatcher's back, not violently but with undeniable authority. The gesture communicated a simple truth. The past could be contained, but it would never be allowed to reclaim the present. Elena's gaze softened slightly, only to return immediately to its sharp, commanding focus. "You thought $10 could define my worth," she said. "But it didn't. I did. And now, you are defined by nothing but what you left behind." Thatcher's chest heaved, pride shattered, ego in ruins, hope extinguished. For the first time in his life, he saw clearly that love, resilience, and human connection were not commodities to be purchased. They were earned through sacrifice, loyalty, and courage. The air was thick with quiet, yet it was alive. Each breath, each heartbeat seemed to underscore Thatcher's utter isolation. He had no allies, no leverage, no escape. The office, the city, and the family he abandoned stood united against him. Hope tilted her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, not cruel but serene. She had witnessed the truth of her life crystallized in this moment. Some people leave, some people betray, but those who endure, those who protect, and those who love, they win. Thatcher's voice cracked as he whispered, I didn't know." Elena shook her head, a quiet finality in the movement. "You didn't know because you never cared enough to learn," she said. Her words were sharp, precise, and absolute. "And that is the difference between us." The security team's grip on him tightened slightly. Outside, the city lights reflected on the glass, highlighting shadows that seemed to stretch across the floor like a reminder of every misstep he had made. Thatcher's eyes met Elena's one last time, searching for mercy, for acknowledgement, for the power he once held. But all he found was calm, measured authority. The woman he had tried to break now stood taller than him in every sense, physically, emotionally, morally. Leo's eyes flicked toward the SUV. The shadowy figure had disappeared, leaving only the hum of the engine, a reminder that danger could come. But here, now, inside this office, justice had already been delivered. Thatcher's knees sank further into the floor, his pride crushed, his illusions stripped bare. He realized fully that no money, no charm, no status could rewrite the truth. He had lost everything that truly mattered. Elena took a step back, hand resting lightly on Hope's shoulder. Her gaze returned to Thatcher, calm but unyielding. "Remember this," she said softly. "The truth cannot be bought, and this is the cost of your choices." The room fell silent except for the soft breathing of the three people who had endured the storm and survived. Thatcher, broken, gasping, realized that for the first time he understood the depth of everything he had lost. Suddenly a faint tapping echoed from the ceiling vents, soft, deliberate. Elena's eyes narrowed, scanning the room. Leo's hand went to his side. Someone else was in the building, and this time, it wasn't Thatcher.